Well, we were always busy on the ranch. My dad used to like to take the odd hunting trip. He might take a hunting trip with 3 or 4 friends for maybe 3 or 4 days once every 3 or 4 years. He didn't do it all the time, but that was a bit of a break. Of course, what do you do on a hunting trip in those days? You take a horse and a pack horse and do the same sorts of things you were doing at home. But anyway, it was with friends. It was out in a different landscape. They enjoyed doing that. My grandparents had a circle of friends in the community, and they had a bridge club, and they used to play bridge every couple of weeks, particularly more in the sort of September till May time period. My grandmother was a great lover of classical music, and she became acquainted with a guy called Bob Kerr. And Bob Kerr hosted a 2-hour classical music radio program on Coast to Coast CBC. And so he'd play this music, and she would listen to that every day. And of course, she had a collection of her own. And when she died, I think it was just about the next day or the day after, he dedicated his 2-hour show to her and played all her favorite pieces of classical music on his radio show. So my parents were not into rodeo so much. They did not rodeo, and many did. Most, I suppose, did. My mom was more into horse showing. She loved to show her thoroughbred horses and ride in dressage competitions and dressage clinics and that sort of thing. She drugged my brother and I to Pony Club, and we hated every minute of it, but we went to it regardless. And I did the same favor for my daughters, one of whom actually enjoyed it. But so there was lots of stuff going on. But it wasn't a case of run to town every day either. When I was growing up, once a week at most would be a trip to town for my parents. Often not that often, but of course we were off to school every day. So in the school year, but there was stuff going on, and then as people began to move into the community, a lot of city people, often doctors like the Price family. Dr. Price was a very accomplished pediatrician in Calgary. He bought property in the community. Another family, the Pogues, bought property in the community. A number of people bought lots in benchlands and had Guy Gibson build them a log house on it. So the community began to fill up with non-ranchers. But nevertheless, for the most part, wonderful people and very often very accomplished people. And they would, and they added to the community as well. They brought a different mindset. People like that would come out and tell you how beautiful the country was, and then it would cause us to stop and sit back and look around and say, yeah, it is beautiful country. And sometimes you forget that when you're working hard and trying to keep the wolf away from the door. So these folks, a number of them became very valued members of the community and still are today. Carl Wood became a very well-known landscape artist, I guess, particularly. And he and Marie moved into benchlands and raised a couple of boys here, both of whom are now professional artists. Tragically, Carl died very young. I think he was 47 when he passed away. But he loved hanging around the ranches and taking photographs that he could later paint, use as a basis for a scene in his painting. And he was a wonderful guy. And his wife still owns and operates Gainsborough Galleries in downtown Calgary. Of course, Guy Gibson, being the owner of the property that became Benchlands, was a real character. He had participated in the last, I think, of the open range roundups in Cochrane, 1901. He was in the Canadian military in the First World War, and then came back here and became the local historian / philosopher that everybody loved to visit with. And Guy never married, didn't have a family, but and he lived to a ripe old age, into his 80s, I believe, in the community here. But I mean, up the valley, there was the Richards family, there was Dawsons, Harrises, there was several families came and went through the Bar C Ranch. There was the Wassons, there was ourselves, there was Beggs, there was Helen McDonald, was another character, a very independent woman. She never married. She ran her own ranch for years by way of hired help. I'm not so sure how much sort of riding or fencing she did, but she ran the place, and she had employees that worked for her, and continued the ranch on until she retired, sold it to her nephew. And of course, the McDougall family, descendant of the McDougall missionaries, they own land around the community as well. And I think of the Dutchicks and McKendricks were very well respected people in the community, and hard workers and good stock people, and honest as the day is long. So it was a pleasure to. It was really a treat that most people wouldn't get. It's an opportunity to grow up in a community such as this with multi-generational families working on the landscape and doing what they needed to do to survive economically. Yeah, when Bill Bagley was worked for the Brewster family in Banff for years, and he was sort of the iconic cowboy. If you see his image in Stu Cameron's cartoons and in all kinds of different places around, and they, of course, were what we call a dude outfit or a guest outfit. And he wintered up on Meadow Creek straight west of here and kept track of 200 or 300 head of horses up there in the wintertime. So he was pretty isolated. So a bunch of people around here every once in a while would just say, well, it's time to visit old Bill, and away we'd go with a convoy of four-wheel drives. I remember one year it took us 2 hours to get in 11 miles as the snow was so deep. But and then the same thing, clear out the one-room cabin, get everything out of the way. We had live music and a square dance collar, and a party that usually would last till daylight. And of course, in the middle of winter, daylight is quite a ways out. I also remember 1969. I was 17. My dad had an employee whose name was Peter Raymond, and he's now a well-known documentary film producer in Ontario, in Toronto. But it was his first trip west. He was a student between first and second years political science in Queen's University. And he wanted to go west, and he put an ad in the paper for a ranch job, and my dad wound up hiring him, and he was is a super guy. He was only on the ranch for 4 months that summer, but he sure fit in a hurry. But in late July 1969, we were busy haying. The weather was good, and we had hay to bale, and we were haying. And I was absolutely shocked that I would have been 17, my brother 15, Peter was probably 19. And my dad shut down the haying equipment in the middle of a warm, sunny afternoon. And we went in the house, and we turned on the black and white TV, and we watched Neil Armstrong walk on the moon. My dad didn't believe a word of it. He thought the whole damn thing is cooked up in Hollywood. But nevertheless, he shut down the haying equipment long enough for us to watch that happen. It was kind of a memorable thing.